Okay, we are live.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another community forum where we field questions that that our community and people who follow us post on our Discord channel. And if you're not on our Discord channel, you can access it via the Institute website. And we also kind of fill the time just chatting amongst ourselves about topics that are of interest, especially things that Nick likes. Um, and all, but no, just in general, the things that we happen to, the things that cross our mind kind of over the course of the week that don't pertain directly to our research, so we wouldn't mention it on any of our other live streams. So we take this kind of slot. We use this slot as an opportunity to air those. But first, maybe we can begin with some of the questions. Maybe it's just one question this week that we've received that we haven't answered yet. And I think Carlos has it.
Yes, so there's one question from McDougan Bale on Discord. They say, how unreasonable would it be to try and relate the equilibrium of homeostasis to an economic equilibrium of molecular interactions in the organism? So I guess trying to draw an analogy between molecular interactions and homeostasis in a biological system with economic equilibrium. I mean,
Wait,
I find it quite enticing. I imagine there's work that exists done in this direction, and a lot of system science has probably described same. I mean, the two systems being paralleled here with similar models, but I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I guess one of the parallels is how much do you, because the molecular, I mean, if you had said something like cellular interactions in the organism, but molecular interactions in the organism, I think that pushes it to a scale where I think the analogy becomes a little bit tricky, which makes it to me more interesting. Like, it's easy to make the analogy between sort of economic agents and cells, right? Biological cells, because these are quite similar. I mean, these are quite similar entities. But economic agents and just molecules or molecular, I don't know. That seems a bit more like what are the gain functions? What are the transactions and so on? Just so broadly speaking, it's difficult to.
Well, this is all about statistics. In both cases, you again have like some partial differential equations, and you just solve them. In one case, it's just some utility of money flowing around. In another case, it's just some concentrations of molecules, right?
Sure.
On the micro scale, you wouldn't be able to say something interesting about how one particular molecule interacts with another, and it's something. It has to be something emergent, and
Sure.
it's like behavioral economics. You can talk about how people individually interact, but it doesn't matter until you like scale it up and say how this affects overall system. So similarly, if you have some molecular interaction, you still have to scale it up and do some modeling, and then you can say something about emergent system in biology. So
Yeah.
and you can draw analogies to other fields, scientific fields with those, not just economy and economics and biology.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I think
Simple.
the question. Sorry, go on. Wait.
No, that's it. It's like,
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that you can take the question as you just said, like this drawing an analogy between economics and biology, but I was, and certainly there will be models, some dynamical system modeling in both cases. In both cases, very big statistical effects that need to average to something, and you want to observe the emergent statistics and so on. But I think, so I agree. I think that is sort of more typical in the analogy, but I think there is something that I'm intuitively sensing as a bit more fundamental or deeper here, which is the fact that the observation that I made when trying to say how accurate is this metaphor, this analogy, is like if you just look at molecules, just just pure chemistry in its most basic form, where you have this more or less classical particles flowing around with information that is kind of digital, like the atom composition and things like that, and bond types and things like that. And they are mostly bouncing off each other in this mechanical way, more or less classically, right? And they are reacting via quantum interactions, but effectively it's kind of like input-output sort of, so many atoms get in, so many atoms go out, things like that. And my point is, that is quite a mechanistic kind of digital system in a way. And I find interesting that if you make a sophisticated enough complex of such sort of, what is the term? So if you put this system in sort of entangled, in a interconnected network of reactions and so on, you end up with something that looks like a cell. That thing, usually people call it organism, that resembles an economic agent, right? It's like something that is after a resource. Resource can be anything. It could be energy more broadly, but it could be concretely like nutrients that it needs to get from the environment, or some specific chemicals or water or whatever, right? So like cells resemble economic agents much more than just random molecules floating around, right? So I am trying to, I'm giving this sort of overview to make the point, or make the argument, that I think it's not a symmetric analogy in some sense. It's not so much that cells and biological systems can look like economic agents, but economic agents or economic systems rather. I would say that beyond the systems, dynamical systems analogy, or the statistical analogy that you pointed out, I think there is something to the nature of a biological system that makes it economical from by definition, in some sense. And I feel like that's almost like a trait of what life is as a phenomenon in nature, that there's some degree of resource management. And the concept of resource management, if you look around in nature, where do you see resource management that is not being touched by life, like by the biological phenomenon, right? It's kind of like a...
There, for example, like the whole resource theory in quantum, in quantum information science.
But that's modeling, right? Like that's not so much like observing like agents.
Well, it can be applied. It's more of a framework that can be used in any kind of diagrammatic system, especially.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So you can have a resource theory of biological cells. You can have resource theory of economic agents. You can have resource theory of the actual quantum computation itself, in a way. Right?
Sure.
When your resource is some kind of entanglement. That is the context I'm aware of.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. But what I'm pointing at is more the phenomenon itself, more than the modeling framework. It's like if you go out in the world and you observe humans doing the economic activity they do, right? You have this idea. It's the concept of an economic agent is a powerful idea there, because it's kind of obvious that there are individuals. You are one. You recognize yourself in the multitude of agents and so on, and it's kind of obvious that economics is made of agents, even if you don't need them for some particular analysis. When you look at cells, it's similar. Like an organism is made of cells, and cells do behave like economic agents in the sense that, it's not only both are modeled by a similar framework, and the framework is kind of unique. It's more like the phenomenon itself before modeling as it appears to us. So in the thinnest possible modeling, there's always some degree of modeling, I guess, you can escape. It's not like true reality. It's just the thinnest, most direct evidence or direct engagement with this phenomenon seems to be somehow deeply analogous. It's not so much that you can. I'm sure that you can model things like orbital mechanics with resources. Potential energy is essentially that. The concept of potential energy is some kind of virtual resource that is being balanced between kinematic energy and so on. It's not so much that you can make some model that uses that concept, but more that the phenomenon itself seems to be presenting to us the phenomenon of kind of currency. I mean, the energy currency of cells. I mean, it's something that is quite explicit, right? They literally use a molecule as energy currency, and they shift it around and distribute it like you would trying to distribute like fuel in a population or something.
But as a word of caution, I mean, I will suggest that one, I don't assign significant merit to agent-based modeling in economics. And also, I think that the effort to equate individual human agents with, say, cells, I think is pretty degrading to humans. I mean, so first of all, in economic science fiction, we have some economies in which you have these individual atomized agents and they're utility maximizers, and they're trying to balance their own budget in order to, consume or allocate their resources according to their own kind of rational allocation. What does that have to do with economies? I mean, this is not how economies work. They're based on policy, based on state actions, based on subsidies. Especially when you go to the global south, they're largely informed by international organizations, by power relations, by conflicts, by diplomacy. I mean, the economy is not just, a bunch of people buying and selling goods with some emergent currency emerging. So one concern that I have in general with this microeconomics framework, where it's like people are bartering and then at some point they come up with money. I mean, I think if you look at the historical record of the emergence of debt or the emergence of currency, it's not how it occurred. So I think it's one kind of ahistorical. I also think that it runs the risk of reducing
Wait, what do you mean?
The notion of
what do you mean that that's not how it occurred?
Well, this notion that people are kind of bartering items, and at some point they decide to set up some sort of a currency as some sort of a medium of exchange. I mean, based on anthropological work that I've seen, this is not really how currencies are suggested to have emerged on a large scale.
How
It
did
usually
it
has
emerge?
more. Well, it usually has more to do with nation and state building, where you have to maintain some sort of a military or an army. And you have to have. I mean, basically, my take on it is you have to have some way where people are allocating resources and paying one another, even when there's no real trust that is set up. On a smaller scale, it's not necessarily inevitable that you have something like a currency with some wide range like we have today emerge. So my main concern, actually, Murray Gell-Mann said something about this. I remember when he was interviewed, his basic take was, and this is kind of funny coming from him because agent-based modeling was something that was quite celebrated at Santa Fe Institute. I mean, his basic take was, I think he described it as something like you have physicists and economists who are essentially presenting this pretty far right-wing view of human nature and of the economy, not because they even hold those positions, but because it's mathematically convenient to do it. It's easy to create some sort of cellular automata-based model or some model where you have individuals and they're basically just looking out for themselves. They're basically just trying to minimize their expenses and maximize it. But what does that have to do with everyday? What does that have to do with everyday affairs? So my own concern is, and also you can analogize those kinds of human creatures to cells. But I think that just suggests how degrading that picture is. I mean, hopefully we presume there's more to human nature than trying to consume as much as you can and minimize your resources. I mean, there's more to life than that, right? There's like help for other people, there's solidarity, there are gifts, there's more to life than just every individual out for themselves in some sort of emergent model. So my own concern about agent-based modeling is it's basically an ideological form of kind of science fiction that even people like Murray Gell-Mann recognized as like it's a very elegant, mathematically it's very elegant. And that's kind of something that happens in economics quite often, which is if you make some pretty devastating assumptions about human nature, then sure, you can make these relatively, mathematically parsimonious models of how they trade, but what does it have to do with the world? It doesn't account for many of the factors that lead to the economic problems that we have today. So that's kind of a general word of caution, from my own opinion, about what role do these agent models play? And my concern is that they basically just serve as these kind of toys for people to try and think about how they can kind of model the way that people behave. but when they're not accurate, I think that they lead to just misrepresentations of the way that the world works and some pretty base and demeaning views of how people behave and what people care about.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with if you take a model and try to interpret, human behavior, human nature from something that is aiming at emergent modeling, like obviously that's but I mean more than in my view, more than questioning the models themselves, I would question the person drawing that conclusion from learning that from a model, because if you read, a human being or an economic agent in this model is this abstract two variable thing that is going to try and optimize this and that. It's like whoever think that that's an actual statement about a person needs to think twice about what they think a person is. So, but I think going back to the question, I think the question was more in the direction of what if you applied a more economic outlook or lens to biological systems, and that's what I found intriguing, and that's what made me think of the fact that economic systems really only exist in the context of biology in some sense. It's like, I think if you claim today with our knowledge of life in the universe, if you claim that we've only observed economy based on biological life, I think that's a true statement to this day, right? So, because everything, like, it's almost like a tautology to say that. It's like I mean, sure, you can simulate stuff and you can create simulations and automata systems and things like that. But I mean, those are technology that come from life eventually. And like, my point I think stands that you can't really observe. I don't know. I mean, imagine that. What would that look like, right? When you look out in the universe and you see a system behaving economically. I mean, I think Nick's point is relevant here. He said that there's some resource theory like to describe quantum interactions and so on. I mean, that's interesting because a lot of people made the case of quantum systems seem to be making choices or something like that, or something analogous to making choices or things like that, because there's randomness, there is some probabilistic behavior, and that seems to be quite fundamental in those systems. But I don't know. I found it intriguing to consider. Now, when it comes to the political and somehow social derivations of the models, I don't know. I feel like that's kind of an orthogonal conversation.
Well, but models, I mean, they do get used, like in
Sure.
policy circles and think tanks. I mean, people do try and apply these, and they definitely do have consequences in policy. So
Yeah, I'm not saying
this-
they are harmless. What I'm saying is, should you stop? I mean, this takes us very directly to the hot topic of the day. But should you stop research in nuclear physics in the 30s because of the danger of getting the atomic bomb? I don't think so, right? I mean, you get there and then you say, okay, how do we use this technology? Same with model, right? Like you make the model and then how do you use this model? Like I see that the economic model has an extra layer of ambiguity and risk, which is that if people take that as the starting point of reality, right? That's different from a technology that just exists and it's like, okay, this is what the input it requires and this is the output it produces, and it's a scientist's job to describe that input-output process, and then it's the society's political job to decide how to implement that technology in their community. Economic models are a bit riskier in that they can be interpreted as describing the status quo of a society or describing what human nature is in some level. So I agree that there's the extra level, but I think that as long as people are aware that models are models, then shouldn't be that different from other technology or other scientific advancements.
But I think but another issue for economics, and this pertains to I think actually some deeper philosophical questions, which is it is fashionable to posit this correspondence between nature, like whether it's, say, you can take the cellular example, or if you're adopting this kind of, I think social Darwinism came from Herbert Spencer. And then there was this notion that you could start to think about, private equity firms or traders or something in terms of the social Darwinist treatment, in which basically even if they're competitive or predatory, there are predators in nature, and somehow this is also something to aspire to. I mean, one issue there is how different are humans from what we see in the rest of nature, and what should we aspire for? So, for instance, I mean, we use this term biology. As I understand it, I think Aristotle made a distinction between zoe, like zoos, like the kind of bare life of animals, and bios, which was this kind of prospect of humans engineering or organize something towards a kind of a better life. And so one of my key concerns is just, if you have some kind of view of nature, I mean, nature can be quite nightmarish and brutal, or at least I think it offends often my delicate human sensibilities, what you see kind of in nature in general. Like, you all remember from Family Guy, damn nature, you scary. I'm sure you guys remember that from Family Guy episode. So, like, the question is, to what extent do we want to take presuppositions or norms or expectations regarding what economy should be like based on just what we see out in the wild? Because my own challenge is basically, if you do that, then we'll be no better than animals. And you might say, well, look, we are animals, so that's ultimately, we won't be any better. But you can also make the argument, we do many other things that we don't see other animals doing. And so, if we're willing to give ourselves some degree of differentiation, can we hold ourselves to higher standards and try and come up with, should we expect economics basically just to have like these trophic levels and these predators, and should it basically just look like everyday life, or should it look like just nature as we see it, or can economics be better? And if it can be better, should we try and model that instead of just trying to model like, how do Lotka-Volterra equations or other things kind of reproduce themselves in economic systems? So I think that the presumptions that you hold will become deeply embedded into your model. They will inform them on a deep level. And I think that will determine to some degree in advance how they're used. If you basically presume that economics is social Darwinist, or in one way or the other, it is not too different from what you see kind of wild animals do, then that's going to inform the model, and it'll inform what you do with it. I don't see how if you have a relatively undignified view of human affairs, you ultimately view human affairs to be kind of in that way, it'll lead to your outlook. I mean, that was the case with Hobbes, right? Hobbes said like the life of humans is brutish, nasty, short, and but he also had a very specific prescription for it, which was you have to accumulate as much power as you can so that you prevent brutish people from harming each other. So I think the presumptions you make in economics, especially if you draw on nature as an analog, I think it will inform the models themselves and will constrain what you can do with them.
Yeah, I mean, I would obviously would like to hear someone else's thoughts, but just to, I think, not because I'm in agreement with essentially everything you're saying at a personal level, but I think that when it comes to modeling and research and the sort of intellectual inquiry of describing behavior of systems and things like that, I mean, I at least personally don't, it's kind of they are not separate because I'm a moral agent and I have ethics, and I'm, when I'm thinking rationally, I'm still considering all these other variables somehow. But when I'm actively working intellectually, like, to me, these things live in completely separate planes in some sense, because you like to think that the criteria for scientific inquiry and the so-called scientific method, is kind of a buzzword that is losing meaning every day, but that system at all, if it exists at all, it can be made concrete at all, I think is based precisely on the assumption that the observer should not matter that much, or at least remove as much as possible, and therefore when you're trying to make a model of the economy, I don't see it being any different from trying to model the phases of solar activity, or the rate of decay of certain nuclei or whatever, right? Like, to me, it's a phenomenon in the world, and you can measure it, and so you can model it, right? And of course, as I said earlier, there are risks involved in the understanding that this is describing human reality or human nature of the human world. But I mean, if you have a good enough scientific training, and by that I mean you've been to some preliminary courses in primary school or something, you should be able to understand. I mean, not the typical ones, because many of the typical primary school courses are terrible. But if you have a good scientific training and you understand what science is, then I think it's unlikely you will mistake model for reality, or you would, say things like, oh yeah, because it is particularly useful to get predictions about the rate at which people spend their savings. It is actually useful to model these as directly Darwinian agents in an evolutionary context. That just might happen to be true, right? That it is the case that if you want to predict the rate at which people spend their savings, their life savings or whatever, in order to model that, the most effective model to do that is one that assumes that individuals are purely Darwinian, trying to compete on an equal footing with other agents, right? It might happen that it's actually the best way to predict, and so if it is, then it's saying something true about reality, right? Like, it's not saying that people need to be competitive and tramp on each other and things like that, but it's just saying something true about the world. At least just the simple statement that I just made, right? Like the literal, when you model things like this, then this correlates. At least there is that saying about reality. But probably it's a bit more than that. It's saying, the kind of dynamic that goes on here can be reduced to this because people only care about this aspect when it comes to spending their savings, and that aspect is largely just dependent on direct competition and blah blah blah, right? So, I feel like the dangers are great, and I sympathize, as I said, like at a personal level, I sympathize with when I hear people talk about like this very liberal. I mean, I'm fairly liberal philosophically, right? But when I hear people speak of liberal economic theory, and you just remove all regulations, everything will, the market will find its way. I find it like, dude, what universe are you living on? I mean, how do you think that the system that we have already put in place is going to self-regulate and just do the right things that you're enjoying today, right? So it makes no sense to me to go to these extremes of, oh yeah, it's just assume that the people competing is going to fix everything. But at the same time, I think that having a population that is well educated enough to not misinterpret models is also desirable. Like, so you don't have to have that caution, I guess.
Yeah, just one other thing before I shut up. I mean, I think so. I very much enjoy like pure math, very much enjoy like political philosophy. I think things become messy, not just in applied math, but then applied math. Because I know this because like I've lived in like Washington D.C. in the kind of in the policy wonk world. Things get, I think, quite messy as soon as it's like applied math, and then people are trying to use it in order to decide how the world should work. That's, I think, the most messy thing, because when it's applied math, the kind of aesthetician in you will think, oh, this is a really beautiful model, right? And for mathematically, that's perfectly fine. But if mathematically it's right, and even if it captures some kind of behavior, I agree with Carlos that like if you have some model of savings or how people take on debt and pay it off or something, you take some very small issue in economic behavior and then you try and model it. If you model it and your model is predictive, then like, well done, you have some particular model. I think the particular danger is when that comes to inform people's views of human nature and how the economy works, et cetera, and then you make like structural adjustment prescriptions to Argentina or something based on these, and it doesn't make any sense. But my main concern is, economics, I don't treat economics the way that I treat physics or other sciences, because ultimately, I think economic thought does shape uh, what we do. And my own personal view is that one of the main contributions of economics is it basically shapes individual attitudes or assumptions or worldviews. And those, I think, in turn, will also inform policy. So that's my main caution about economics is it's not like the other sciences. You can believe whatever you want to believe about physics, about mathematics, and it's more or less pure innocent inquiry. But I think economic ideas, even when it's just even when it's just modeling, they do have consequences. So I try and take more responsibility for, you know, how much, what would be the consequences of thinking this way? Um, does this really capture how I think humans behave, et cetera, et cetera? So I'm much
Sure.
harsher. Yeah.
I think that's analogous in a way to uh, biomedical research in some sense, because
Mm.
I mean, and I would still be on the side of, if your science is sound and you know your boundaries, you should, I mean, you should be fine. As in, some people, overhear a conversation about, oh, what would happen if you have, you constrain a baby when it's born, blah, blah, blah. It's some horrible nightmarish experiment that you're thinking of, right? It's like this person is an absolute psychopath. What is wrong with these people, right? But I honestly think that these experiments not to be performed. I don't think they should be performed, but I think they should be in the realm of possibility, because that's just part of science, right? In the sense of,
Right.
like,
Hmm.
you need to know that these are possible to exist, right? And so in some sense of like, I'm never going to. So it's again going back to what I said earlier. Like, you, as a scientist, you look at the world and you say these are the possibilities, and I'm not going to cross the boundaries in the society that I live in, or maybe willingly breaking the rules if you want, or whatever. But then, as any breaking the rules is your responsibility, whatever, right? But the science is never going to say do this or do that, right? Like, science is just going to be a mechanism of description,
Yeah.
and
Right.
I don't know. I feel like we should maybe spend the last few minutes, and because I'm sure that Nick and Richard had particularly, hopefully also Łukasz, have thoughts on the hot topic of the moment of AI, AGI, and so on, because this is very much like the Manhattan Project of our times, I feel, or like the nuclear physics of our time. Like, I'm sure that, well, maybe not in the 30s because it was kind of secret. People were not. There was not a public awareness that the atomic bomb was being worked on. Although it was known there was a possibility, but it's not like today that it's like media headlines of like, yeah, the AGI is a danger, or no, AGI is the best thing that can happen to humanity. I mean, if you zoom out for a second about the details of what's going on with AI, it's actually kind of cool that something that is quite technical and scientific is dominating a lot of conversation. I find it interesting, and it's funny that you get authoritative opinions that go either way, right? I mean, some people are saying, oh, this is the worst thing we could be doing. We have to slow down. Some people are saying, no, this is the future of humanity. Let's go full steam ahead, right? So that's why I find it a good topic of conversation. Not because I want to always go back to AI and just talk about it, but I find like it's even at a meta level of science and society. I think it's an interesting situation. So I don't know. I would like to hear Nick's and Richard's thought on the situation and how it resembles this sort of how seriously you take your scientific models and how people understand it and so on.
I actually used that term Manhattan Project when discussing it with a friend in relation to this call for a halt, which immediately struck me as a sort of ridiculous idea. Maybe it's marketing. I don't know. Maybe this is just some way to get everyone sort of overvaluing the thing, or some clever way of. I'm not sure. No, it was signed by like 1,000 people or so forth. But look, I mean, you have nations with very questionable human rights records who are, and I'll just say that the first letter of that nation begins with the letter C, and they're now sort of siding with another neighboring nation with the letter R, and we have all sorts of very, worrying things happening. We don't want, especially when they have these crazy social credit systems in place where people are constantly being sort of monitored and valued based on the decisions they make. Did they buy a bottle of alcohol? Did they, whatever?
Yeah.
It's like your credit score gone wild. I mean, the fact that we have a credit score is kind of, some sort of risk model that creditors are using to decide whether we're sort of worthy receivers of a loan.
Yeah, I'm not
But in
worthy.
but yeah, or not worthy. And but in the case of screw it, I'll just say in the case of China, it seems far more. It's like a technocracy. It's like straight out of 1984. It's as if they've just read 1984 as some kind of playbook, and now they want to sort of carry it out. And the more you sort of incorporate these advanced information processing systems to, monitor, control people and the rest, it just leads down a very dark path because now power starts to become concentrated in individuals and as they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So yeah, I would say don't halt the progress of AI for that reason, but also um, I'm not afraid of AGI either because I firmly believe that it's not possible, or at least not with the current approaches we're taking now. So as much as people like to talk about it and like to postulate that we may be there soon, there was even a video I watched. Some guy was saying, "Oh, we'll be there in 18 months or something." No, no way.
People have been saying that for, I think,
Yeah, and
decades.
now you have people like
When did
Ben
Kurzweil's
Goertzel
book?
come.
Yeah,
Yeah,
when
yeah,
did
and
Ben Goertzel's book come out? Singularity is Near. It was like in 2000,
are you talking about
and
Kurzweil or sorry, I mentioned Goertzel.
Kurzweil. But then
Oh, Kurzweil. Yeah.
Goertzel said we were 10 years away from AGI in
Yeah, and
2010,
he's
I
he's
think.
he's another one that sort of comes out of the woodworks and sort of nothing he's done has been sort of very relevant in recent times. And it's kind of, I mean it's interesting because their knowledge model was this hypergraph represent, but they just have a knowledge representation. That's all. It's just facts and sort of relations between them and some very sort of structural um, approach, but it's nothing like the human brain that's infinitely more complex. And I'm not even making a complexity argument. It's a kind of yeah class of computational uh, universality or whatever. That again back to the sort of super Turing and so forth. I don't and yeah, Penrose makes some nice arguments about whatever tiling problems and is it the Penrose-Lucas argument? But so I'm not afraid of like Skynet or anything. I mean, and yeah, when people say I'm not afraid of AI, I'm afraid what stupid humans do with AI technology rather than what AI will do. It's like what responsibilities will we give these premature systems, Like the other day, I tell ChatGPT, um, I suffer from a condition where if you're nice to me, I get offended, but if you're nasty to me, then I interpret. I would call yeah, yeah. Actually, it was in a tweet from somebody else, but I decided to reproduce it, and it's like it speaks to you in the most degrading way and almost tells you that you should die because you've managed to kind of twist its own internal Asimov laws of robotics equivalent that OpenAI staff. And the thing is, yeah, those I think Elon Musk has made the not that I put much value on the things that he says, but one thing he has said, which I kind of agree with, is that ChatGPT has a lot of political sort of bias embedded in it because of the contents of its initial prompt that are put in by its creators seem to have given it sort of a bit of political bias, which I think in itself is also quite dangerous. So. Um, but yeah, is it as significant as the atom bomb? Yeah, for sure, because Manhattan Project was, if we don't get to it, then Hitler will at some point. I mean, whether they could have or not, because they were just completely incompetent, the Nazis. So I mean, yeah, it's we probably would have been okay anyway. But thank God we only used two of them against civilians. But if you look at the thousands of tests that we had done since and the amount of damage that we've done that way, then I guess we have been kind of irresponsible. And now you have these sort of superpowers positioning themselves. I mean, what does it look like where you sit around the negotiating table and you say, oh, we'll just unleash this AI system, if so AI is the weaponization of AI, like what does that look like when you're anyway, I had a whole bunch written down about the economics thing, but I guess I'll just not not say anything. And yeah,
No, I mean,
but
by,
those
by
are
all
my
means,
thoughts.
Richard. I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
I
I don't want to jump back and forward, so I'll let the other guys speak. And
yeah,
maybe
we can. Yeah, if we get back to it, I mean, just
Cool.
feel free to always speak up, because otherwise,
yeah.
the talkative ones will take hold. Nick.
No, I guess I don't have any. Well, I don't know. My mind already drifted at this point, so I don't have anything specific to say.
Is that
Unless
my fault?
you have some very specific, yeah, it's like with too much shifting around.
Yeah. There
Unless
was
you
a
have
lot of.
something specific question in
Yeah,
mind
sorry. Yeah.
to
Let
focus
me
on.
let me focus on something that, because Richard said many interesting things, but so it's hard to choose. I think one of the, I don't know. Now we are in the community forum, so it's time for like more casual conversation. Like, even though, there are these memes of like fusion energy is always 20 years away, and this is true every 20 years, and so on. Like, this is like, I don't think that's quite. I don't think you can make that argument with AI at all, and the comparison, because I feel like the systems that have appeared in the last 10 years are sufficiently complicated. I'm not going to say complex because I don't know what that means in that context, but like sufficiently obscure even to their creators that it is similar to having discovered some species, that is intelligent in some way, that is performing some kind of agent-like behavior, and you go try to open it up. Oh, it has only 300 neurons, like C. elegans, right? And you know what? 300 neurons is maybe 299 too many, because we don't know how C. elegans works. We cannot. We have mapped out the genome. We have mapped out the network of the C. elegans worm. You have highest resolution possible of a model of this animal. You can still not make a first principle model that predicts the behavior of C. elegans. I think this is I like to always go back to this example because come on, it's 300 neurons. It can't be that difficult, right? So let alone these systems that are billions of parameters and so on, and sure, these parameters or the network, the neural network is simpler than neurons, but still, these are sufficiently obscure and big that my feeling is we're really going into uncharted territory. It's almost like, you know what the boundaries are in some sense, because you know what the systems can do, because they're somehow in a petri dish, some silicon petri dish in a way, right? But I feel like we are really going into this unknown territory, and I say knowing that, for example, language models are what they are, right? In some sense, like they're gonna have all these biases and all these things because they have a very particular origin, and you kind of know how they can be developed. You don't know the details of how they are, but you know how they are raised, right? So the particular question that I was curious to pose to Nick in particular is, how do you feel about this silicon petri dish and AGI, right? Like, because to me that AGI has to somehow transcend the silicon petri dish. It has to have some kind of embodied, and by embodied I don't mean like a literal body, like machine, like moving in the world, but like it has to somehow go beyond this sort of like narrow data structure that it parses and so how do you think of that, like and has your view changed in having seen like how modules can be implemented, how they can sort of be connected and so on?
Well, it's kind of complicated. I have liked this analogy from Max Tegmark conversation with Lex
Yeah, that's
recently.
right.
About like how birds fly, right? And that it's like we invented planes way before we invented how actual birds fly. And in this case, it's like very naive to think about that we have to mimic completely how our neurons connect and how our brains are really complicated machines. So we can, it's like maybe always one step ahead, just one step from completely like multiplying the complexity of what our current models can do, like by 10x, right? And it's completely, as you said, it's completely uncharted territory. And it's like I'm kind of shifting myself a little bit towards safety. I'm kind of more afraid day by day by this actual thing, right? Because like at the first time, I was on this kind of camp that okay, we should just do it, right? Don't care, don't afraid of AGI. But now I'm leaning towards that maybe we can actually should press the brakes, right? In a way,
Right.
in some way, or be more careful about it.
What led you to change your mind, Nick? What made
I
you
don't
more
know,
scared?
maybe that Max Termark conversation and that letter, all of that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful
The
analogy,
reasoning.
Phil. Yeah, the bird flight and the invention of the plane. Because actually I thought about, I was on the train the other day and I saw a bird flying, and in the background there was a plane flying kind of at the same time, and I thought exactly of that. I thought, oh wow, look, I mean that convergent evolution across substrate, just like, and I felt like, so we've distilled some aspect of flight, because I mean what struck me was the geometric similarity, right? Like you look at the shape, it's like, oh right, it's very similar. Like that's laws of physics, aerodynamics, like, sure. But then you think about the mechanics of bird flight and the mechanics of plane flight, and they're super different, right? I mean, the thing is semi-rigid, the thing is whatever, fuel and burning, and there's a single direction of push and so on, and the bird is nothing like that. It has no reaction engine, right? It's all about lift and more sort of morphic adaptation and so on. So it's I was looking at it and thinking, that's two solutions to the same problem, for a wide range of situations. It's two different solutions to the same problem. It's like going from A to B, essentially just translation in space. It's like two solutions, and they bear almost no resemblance when you look at how the structure of it, the substrate of it, and so on. So yeah, I think that analogy is super clever, because it tells a story of how we do things, and and planes can go to the stratosphere and it can fly for like hours and hours and hours, and they can go orders of magnitude faster than birds. This is also the case, right? I think that's, I don't know if that was part of the analogy that they were making, but it's also true, right? Like, I mean, they in some regime, they are two solutions to the same problem, but some aspects, like birds can adapt in a way that is completely impossible for a plane. Like they can fly through branches and do completely crazy adaptive stuff, but planes can go much faster and much higher, and and all these kinds of things. So I think that's what we're going to see with these AIs, right? Like, I mean, it's not going to be like an agent like yourself, but it's gonna understand language in some sense much better than any human ever did, in some sense, right?
Yeah, right. And to take the plane, I'm not sure what Tegmark said, but to take the analogy with planes, it's not as though we should be fearing super birds. What if it's like a bird, but it's some cyborgian psionic bird, and it's gonna be like a Hitchcock movie or something where we're gonna have these super birds and they're gonna attack. No, I mean planes.
There's gonna be aliens.
Yeah, planes do things that are destructive, but they don't do things that birds do, like bomber planes or drones or things like this. We wouldn't call those super birds. They're hazards that are specific to the plane that mostly owe to the differences with the plane. So I think that often we anthropomorphize the risk. What if we have an AGI? It'll be like a superhuman. Will it be a totalitarian? Will it be a terrorist? What will it be? And I think that what we learned from the plane is, I think that there was a philosopher of technology that basically said, as soon as you invent the technology, you also invent all the accidents that go along with it. And so there will be accidents particular to AGI, but who's to say that they'll have anything to do with, it's not like planes are like pooping on our cars or things. I mean, like there are menaces that come from birds. Birds poop on your car. Birds steal the sandwich out of your hand. But it's not like the menace from planes is that they've stolen all the world's sandwiches, or all you can't even get into your car now because they're all white or whatever. That's not the problem. The problem is planes have completely different kinds of threats that they pose. I'm concerned. I mean, one thing that I don't particularly like about the current debate is I fear that the long-term concern about AGI, and some people say it's not long-term, it could come sooner, but what about the discussion of things that could predictably happen soon, like deep fakes, or how, the language models can affect news, and how they're probably going to affect elections, and like those are the concerns. I think the concerns right now are the fabricated imagery that you can get from like ChatGPT or from Midjourney, or basically images, text, and increasingly we see sound. Like how is artificial content going to affect like social, political affairs? Those are I'm not sure why at least 50% of the conversation isn't just about that, because that's what these things do, and those are the dangers that arise in the short term. Whether or not this leads to AGI is also important. And that, I think, could safely be 50% of the conversation. I think at least 50% should be dedicated towards the things we can predictably imagine to go wrong now. I mean, you've probably seen, like, I remember, like, when Trump was arrested or things, there were, like, deep fake photos of Trump in jail and deep fake headshots. And these things will get more sophisticated. And, these have already been problems around elections and politics, around the world for some time. Some of it came out in, when there was the Facebook whistleblower, et cetera, et cetera. So I think those are the short-term risks, and also the risks. I mean, there's also the risk of what will happen to people as certain people become, like on my LinkedIn feed, which I don't particularly enjoy, every single day there's someone with some AI startup basically saying, we're going to put all these people out of work. I mean, just kind of every single day, it's like fashion models. Forget it. We don't need fashion models anymore because we're going to create deep fake for Carlos is like, yeah, I mean, yeah, but then what happens to what are we going to do with all the fashion models besides feed them? And okay, sorry, I shouldn't say that, but
I have an AI startup, but I'm not trying to put people out of a job. I mean, I'm just trying to sort of.
Sorry, Richard, what was that?
I'm saying I have an AI startup, but I'm not trying to put anybody out of a job.
No, sure, you don't have to. But there are people, like, every single day people are saying like, these people gone, these people gone. I think, like, basically, is that plausible? What will happen? And I know, like, there was like an X Prize a few years ago for like radical reskilling, which is probably something that might want to do, but then like you'll reskill people for what, and then how will that affect like the labor market for that particular job? So I think like basically job labor concerns and disinformation concerns, which is highly politicized, it's been politicized since at least 2016. So maybe that's why people don't want to talk about it. I think those are key things to address. And I see people mostly talking about like, James Cameron, Terminator, AGI, Skynet. Why aren't we talking about like jobs, elections, like core things that will probably be the first negative effects of these models?
Yeah, I mean, I think
as long as we
sorry, I saw both Nick and Richard. I was going to say something.
No, go.
Nick, you go.
Oh, I don't know. Also, education is a problem, right?
What's
Not
that?
just the education.
Oh,
education is a problem. So all the things getting disrupted already.
But I think many of what I was going to say just briefly was that we talked about this before. I think Nick and I were on the camp of most of this disruption is probably positive. Like, if like disruption is scary, but not necessarily negative, right? I mean, the disruption in
It's a necessary one.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a necessary one. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
Probably not the disinformation one though, right?
No, I agree. There, some of them is obviously
Well,
just risky
Just
and
every
dangerous.
cloud is a silver lining. I mean, there may be
I don't
some
know.
positive.
I will say like one thing that does concern me is like, and by the way, it's not just that that you can have fake imagery, but people can start accusing things of being fake, right? So let's say there's some
Fake
bombing.
news. Fake news.
Let's say there's some bombing in Kenya, and Al-Shabaab, based out of Somalia, is accused of doing it. And one side says this is a deep fake, planted by some intelligence agency. The other people say it's not. I mean, I think it will become increasingly difficult for people to believe news. And that's something that, people don't believe written news, but I think with time, it's going to become, people are going to be increasingly hesitant to believe videos and images that they see. And as soon as there's one trespass in that respect, like there's an attack, and it didn't actually happen, there was a bombing, it didn't actually happen, there was something that didn't actually happen. I mean, one high profile incident could just ruin, visual evidence in news. So those things do really concern me. I don't see a silver lining. I mean, you can make the argument, distrust, it'll lead to somewhere good. I think that's what Zizek said about Trump when Trump was going to get elected or something.
I think there should be some technical solution to all of those problems.
Yeah.
It's just, and the disruption will cause them to happen much earlier. So
I know, but like
Yes.
one issue though, seriously, if you consider this on a global scale, so you imagine there are people. So imagine the people who are consuming social media news. They don't have any technical background, and then there was some image, and parties on the other side are saying this is fake, this is real, this is fake, this is real, and then some company from London or Silicon Valley says, okay, we did some study and we concluded that this thing was real. I mean, in a highly polarized, paranoid landscape, if you live in some country and someone from Silicon Valley is telling you that this thing is fake or real, I mean, if you're paranoid, that's not going to make much of a differse. I mean, how much fact
you just don't trust the actual thing. You trust the source.
Exactly.
You just every material should have a source, and that's how you trust it, right? So you kind of increase, you assign some rating to the source, so it should kind of even out in the process, and you kind of develop this trust in some particular sources. Don't trust just the random image on the internet. You also have to look at the source, which people already have to do if they really want to check the material, whether it's deep fake or whatnot, right? You have to go deep into the source, but when there's going to be some culture when it's kind of by default comes with the source and it's how trustworthy it is, maybe it will be better.
Yeah. No, I share that. I share that view.
That assumes you have some trusted source. But what about court evidence or things like that? You cannot have video evidence because everyone could fake it.
Yeah, then they'll have to update the system. I just have the feeling
Well,
that.
Yeah, but how do you update the system? Will you have AI battles?
You have to do device. If you have device that made this video, maybe you can kind of tag it, in a way that it came from a trustworthy device and not some AI model. There should be some technical solution to this, and we just have to adapt.
It can be done. It can be done, but
science video basically digitally.
Mhm.
My concern is if you take fact checking, for instance, I know since 2016, fact checking has become, there are more fact checkers. I'm not, at least if you take the example, you could take the US example, you could take other examples. It's not clear to me that fact checking is being widely used and is shaping people's, political opinions. It seems like just mutual distrust is more prevalent, at least at the extremes. But I don't want to speak without knowing. Maybe many people are making use of fact checking, and maybe many people will make use of basically the equivalence of fact checking for imagery. It could. I don't want to be pessimistic. It could be a practice that people adopt, but I think I'm essentially warning if because I think there will be fake content unless we can make some international culture of fact checking, and I don't think it can be unilateral. People will have their own like cultural way of dealing with fact checking. Unless we have something like that, we're going to be in trouble. Also,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's easier. Actually, I think it's easier for video than for written word because, like, distinguishing between fact and fiction, like in news reporting, is quite difficult because it's mediated through bias. People can make little mistakes. At least with a video, you should be able to say like, okay, did this happen or didn't it? Was there an alien landing in Thailand or not?
No, but wait,
things
but
like this.
I think like what Nick was saying. I have an example in mind, a historical example of like the intelligence and counterintelligence arms race in Second World War, for example. There was, I mean, sure, there wasn't AI around, but there was around this cryptography, right? And there was a similar. So, you know, if you look at Second World War, when cryptography is just emerging, and then one side gets cryptographic, you know, and they decipher the Enigma machine, blah blah blah. Then you might think, oh, that is going to disrupt intelligence completely, because how do we encode after this? Only one party has it, and so on. But what happened during the Cold War afterwards was there was some kind of equilibrium, right? Like, I mean, it got to an equilibrium because everyone was playing that game, and so I feel like with fake content, AI generated content, it's likely that we will have a similar situation where, you know, at first it will be quite shocking. There might be some disruption initially, some very acute disruption of like one side, one partisan part of a society makes a claim about another and then backs it up with completely generated fake material, and then something terrible happens. But then when, you know, the case is exposed and it's dissected, it's like, look at this is completely fake, this never happened, because, you know, it's in direct contrast with the evidence, and there's like multiple sources like checking everything. Then everyone will be like, oh, so this is the world we're living now. And you know, and initially it will just be institutions or like the agencies and so on, but increasingly it will be like people. It's like everyone would live in a world where they look at a video that is absolutely photoreal, and it's like 4K resolution, 60 frames per second, and it's like flawless, and you can no longer trust it because it's made of pixels, right? And the source doesn't have some kind of agreed certification that is coming from this place, because at this point text-based information already has this problem, right? And there hasn't been an apocalypse, right? Because everyone can fake all text in the world. And we are fine, right? There's no, I mean, sure, there's influence, there's fake news and influence in public opinion and blah blah blah, but we are getting by more or less okay when all the written like signature, this is signed by someone, could be completely false, and you know, you have these bots of people just making fake statements all the time and fake tweets and all that kind of stuff, right? And the world, like, I don't see that this is like a tragedy. I mean, or like an apocalypse. I see some particular bad cases, but I don't see. So I feel like with this video, AI generated video, which I think will come, and it's quite scary that you will see just photoreal, like indistinguishable from taken footage, AI generated content, and it can be weaponized, and I'm sure there will be some dramatic effect at some point. But I also think that as a society, people will look at it and will say, right, so that's the world we live in. We need to do something, and we have to come to a consensus of how we're going to work. And I don't know exactly how that looks like. I don't know if, as Nick said, some kind of source rating, or I don't know if you will have to, you know, we'll come to an agreement of some kind of standardization of digital platforms or whatever it is. I don't know, but I think eventually, if it's informational and it's not more like atomic bombs or something like that just destroys things like mechanically in some sense, I think it's likely that we will come to some kind of agreement. Now, if it's about agents somehow taking over those systems, and the agents themselves are antagonistic to us because they are like they're agents in a proper sense of the word, right? Like they're trying to do things against our will, then that's a different business, right? That's a different game. But if it's humans using tools that are powerful to do certain things, I think that we've had the 20th century I think is a good historical playground to see how humanity behaves in those kind of situations where there's like some very powerful new technology and then disrupts something and then stabilizes. And I have a feeling that it's not going to be end of the world if we, in a few years, which I'm quite sure it will be the case, we can make these completely fake videos that look for the real, and you can fake anything. As long as it's just
it's not about it being the end of the world. It's about having serious consequences.
Sure.
Especially if you just consider this as a technology that's applied, worldwide.
Yeah, but I mean,
But-
I
in
say
fact-
that
in
because
fact,
it's kind of
that-
inevitable, right? It's like it's
But that-
happening
but
no
that's-
matter what. So.
But that's a key point that I'm trying to make, which is the conversation is on existential risk, extinction of humanity. And I think that having these long-term questions is humanity going to survive? I think that if the conversation is just about that and not about, is there some predictable harm, in various societies, various nations around the world that could be avoided? It might not even affect people in the US. I think that that's the responsible question that be asked now is, what kind of harm could result from this in the next 2 years? Is there anything that can be done to reduce it? It's not about would the world end. It's not about it being apocalyptic. It might not even affect, it might not even affect Europe or the US. But are there places that are especially vulnerable where this could have an effect? And I think, but the issue is, as soon as you start to think that way, then it's like this intersection of AI people and experts who know about different societies around the world. And I doubt that those conversations are happening, but they probably should. Because I think that there will be some effect of this kind of thing. It's already kind of happened with fake news anyway, or disinformation. I don't know what non-loaded term to use anymore. But I think there are problems, and they probably could be prevented. And I caution against this kind of all or nothing. If it's not apocalyptic, then let's go forward. And yes, there will be collateral damage, but that's just going to happen anyway. I would say that the responsible AI people should probably try to think about how the capabilities that we have today could reap negative consequences, in not necessarily uniformly. It might be highly non-uniform, but if there's if there are some particular cases where it could be damaging, trying to work with people who really understand those vulnerabilities in order to try and reduce them. That seems like a basic responsible thing to do.
Yeah, good advice for the AI tech bros. Anyway, we're a bit past over our hour, so
Yeah,
some
I think
final
Carlos
thoughts.
has to eat, and Richard has to decide if he's going to shave or not, or shave anymore. By the way, guys, this is Richard. He's the same guy as before.
No, it's my twin, or
Oh,
I'm the
God.
twin of the guy that you had before, and we just kind of hot desk, and
All right, so memes, Des, thanks for the comments. There was some lively conversation going on. And yeah, some final comments, questions.
I have a ton of thoughts, but I just don't want to extend the thing any longer. Than
Give
I need
some,
to.
Richard. I want to hear.
I could just do it in keyword form, right? So that I'm not actually going to say anything. I'm just
Just
going to read
do
the
some closing
keywords.
comments, and you close the
Okay.
session.
So I was thinking about generative adversarial networks where you have a generator and a discriminator. We have things like deepfake detection and so forth. And then relating to the economy, there's all this thing like efficient markets. As soon as new information comes in, it sort of percolates through the system and gets priced in. That sort of makes me think about viruses entering the body and so forth. So maybe AI is a necessary virus. How about that? That sort of you said. I mean, it's this new thing. Like we'll respond to it, but no, we'll sort of develop our own immune system. And in the same way that when you're training a GAN, your discriminator is becoming better at recognizing, and so we'll become sort of increasingly more competent at sort of incorporating it. As long as we air gap the nukes and keep them offline, we're going to be fine.
That's why we have to slow it down so that it acts like vaccine and not just kill us altogether. So that we have time to develop immunity.
Yeah. Nice analogy.
Uh,
All right, guys.
well, I'm glad to hear, Richard, you have more comments because we can always continue some of these conversations next time. So I'm always happy to know, okay, there's more to be said.
To be
And,
To be honest,
um,
that really summarized everything I had written down in one sort of little closing thing to
Okay.
try and tie it together. We've got the biology, we've got the AI, we've got the whatever else.
Well, Carlos, thanks for coming up with this this question. You are, as always, good at finding ways to provoke us.
There are too many interesting things going around the world. It's not I'm not good at it. I'm just like we live in
It's a
an
good time to
interesting
be
moment in
alive.
history. What can I say?
Interesting
Well,
time.
look, it's an interesting time to be alive. People still have boring conversations, and you managed to save us from doing that. So thanks.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
And
It's a pleasure.
Nick, good luck as you venture back into the darkness, whatever it is that's it's behind you.
Whoa. I like it.
Okay, that was a very dramatic accent. That was beautiful.
Honestly,
All
that's
right.
it.
All right. Yeah, I'm gonna drift back into this cusp form. I'll see you guys later.
What?